Hello everyone, and welcome to the latest instalment of Polishing the Classics, the series in which we analyse classic endgames with engines and discover amazing new plans and resources. I'm Grandmaster Matthew Sadler, and we are having a look today at the game between Wilhelm Steinitz and Steinitz-Lipschuetz, played in 1897, so towards the end of Steinitz's life. I saw this game in a book by German grandmaster and endgame specialist Carsten Müller, and it wasn't a very good technical performance from Steinitz. He ended up drawing and made many mistakes along the way, but it was an interesting position, and well, together with my engines, I just found a lot of interesting things. So we're not going to go through the whole game. We're just going to focus on a few interesting moments that cropped up. What is this position? Well, white is just a little bit better, and that's due to the two bishops. Bishops on d3 and f4 cover, an awful lot of squares of both colours. Obviously, the dark squares for black are slightly sensitive because so many pawns are on light squares. And also, covering squares of both colours, it makes it easier to advance pawns. So, for example, on the king's side, also on the queen's side, gain space and just squeeze black. For black, it's not immediately clear what black's doing. If you look at the black minor pieces, for example, the bishop on c6 is quite a big pawn, and the knight on f6 is defending a pawn that's not even attacked, and it's attacking squares that are covered. Now, if you show this to a modern grandmaster, I think the instantaneous reaction will be that this knight needs to move over to e6. Why should the knight move over to e6? Well, it attacks the d4 pawn, so it'll tie down a white piece, of course. It might well knock this bishop away from this lovely h2 b8 diagonal. It also covers an awful lot of dark squares in black's position. The c5 square, f4, g5, c7. And it's just a very harmonious way of playing. And, well, you'll follow up with f6, f6, g6, king f7, and then maybe at some stage you'll start thinking about challenging the rooks, maybe exchanging some rooks on the c file or on the e file. Note also that a knight on e6, it covers entry points of the king, for example, c5, b6. So it's just a very good move, and that would, basically keep the advantage to a minimum. And it's a very important plan, and we see this coming up again and again in the engine games. However, in this exact position, both Leela and Dragon, but particularly Leela, did something even better, I think, even more accurate. I mean, I was looking at playing knight d7 in this position just to get in knight f8 to e6 as quickly as possible. But Leela played knight h5. So hitting the bishop right away and knocking it off this great diagonal. So bishop to e3 played. And the idea is simply that, okay, well, you've knocked me away, but I'm just going to play g4 and then put the bishop back, and you gain nothing. But here, Leela played g6, and after king f2, knight g7. Now, as you can see, this is quite a nice way, a much better way, actually, of reaching e6 than what I was doing, because you're actually gaining a tempo, knocking the bishop away, and then actually going to get the knight to e6. But it's not just about putting the knight to e6, because after rook c1, Leela went knight f5. And this is a very interesting idea. The idea is that after rook e2, h5 takes, and Leela's just not afraid of this position with these isolated pawns all on the same square as this bishop. b3, rook e6, bishop f4, rook e8, takes, and Leela feels that it's got no problems making a draw, and you know what? It didn't. Rook e2, king f7, takes. White can put a little bit of pressure on various places, but never really make anything serious in this position. So that was a really nice idea, and something I hadn't really seen at all. Actually, Komodo Dragon also played this with black, and actually there was one game with Leela that was quite incredible. Again, so this was what Leela did as white. In actual fact, it's quite a good idea because you've got this advantage of the light square bishops. This bishop's better than this one because this one's restricted by all its pawns. And you do feel you might have some possibilities of invading. Maybe with a wild king invading through dark squares here into black's position. But Leela defends it very carefully here. H4, H6, Rook E8, check, King F3, A5. I wonder, can you see why it's important to play A5? Very important trick in this position. Namely that white's actually threatening to play bishop takes A6 here. And after B, Rook C6, well, wins a pawn and the game. So A5 played. King F2, and now this move, this sequence was absolutely amazing. I just don't know how you, I don't know. I don't think I'll ever think of something like this. But this was what Komodo did. G5, B6, just completely ignoring any invasion along the 7th, and then this move, Bishop F5. Takes, Rook F7, King G6, and I'm just thinking, like black must have blundered here. But after Rook D7, Rook E4, Rook D6 check, actually the engines agreed a draw. Because after King H5, actually a lot of pawns are getting exchanged. Black's actually going to manage to get all of these at some stage, and then you're just going to end up with a rook ending that's just completely drawn. It's that massive hoovering of pawns that we've got so used to, that will kill the position. And of course, the black king is very, very active. So if you do get this f pawn, then the black king is actually going to support it. So that was quite extreme, I have to say. I think it could have defended in a lot more normal ways, and it would have been fine. But it just shows again, the resources that are available in these endgames that I don't think you'd ever guess, unless you looked at them with engines that have just got this, better calculation, but also better insight into, reaching equal endgames. But very, very nice, this plan of knight h5 and then coming around knight f5 and just offering those double pawns. Very, very interesting. So Lipschuetz did play knight d7. I was sort of wondering, actually, after knight d7, I mean, could we actually play for this trick that I mentioned before, just play here and rook c1, with the idea of meeting knight f8 with bishop a6? Well, I thought it was pretty cool. But my engine pointed out that black can play knight e6 here. And now, attacking the pawn on d4, you'd love to defend it with bishop e3, keep hold of your extra pawn, but there is a problem. Just see whether you can spot that. The problem is actually knight d8 in this position, defending the bishop on c6, attacking the bishop on e3, and black actually picks up a piece. Terrible, 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 terrible. So, Lipschuetz played knight d7, king f2 played by Steinitz, and now knight b6. And you don't need to be a grandmaster to understand that this is not actually a very good move. The point is this knight on b6, okay, it's threatening to come into c4, but you just play b3, and then this knight is doing absolutely nothing. Even worse, this b3 is really a move that white wants to play because a4 is coming next to restrict the bishop. I mean, what I did wonder about was, was whether bishop b5 was black's intention originally. Playing this move bishop b5 once you've forced the weakness of a3, but in fact takes, rook e1, we go rook c1, rook e8, rook e1, and then we're coming into e7, and this is quite painful for black. King f8 to try and stop it, we just go bishop d6 check. So maybe that was the idea. The funny thing is that after b3, my engines are already playing knight d7 just to bring the knight back into e6, and they still think, okay, waste a bit of time, but fine, still okay. Lipschuetz played, fine, g6, a4, f6, bringing the king in, but it's not really, you're not really looking after your pieces, and you start to see the evaluation of my engines go up and up and up, really. So just shows how crucial it really is to get this knight active. So rook c1, king f7, h4, And Steinitz is playing it decently up till now. I mean, just what you're aiming for, he's aiming for two things. I mean, he's thinking of trying to play on both sides, so playing h5 to create a weakness here, and then also, as he played later in the game, looking maybe to invade with the king on the c file. So yeah, I mean, it's good strategy from Steinitz. Just I think, to be honest, towards the end of his life, he was also quite ill. So I think the long game that ensued, was probably the cause of a number of the tactical errors that he made. But the strategy, the general thought behind it was, of course, very good. And yeah, I mean, I just in general terms, I'm not a very big fan of the young Steinitz, actually, and I really don't like his games, from 1860, 1870. But I really think he came into his own when he played Lasker, and these were matches that Steinitz actually lost. But I think it was the first time he was really challenged by a truly fantastic player, who was just as gifted in strategy and all of that as Steinitz. And I think that some of the games that Steinitz played against Lasker were really amongst his best, and I think that struggle, really brought out the most. Even though, obviously Lasker was a lot younger and really managed, was always going to win a struggle of that sort. I really thought that Steinitz demonstrated some astonishing play at times. But yeah, then towards the end of his life, he got quite ill, and yeah, I think that from that point of view, you shouldn't judge his play over a long game too harshly. So rook takes c1, king takes c1, rook c8, and it's around here actually that the engines start to say, oh, this is going really wrong. Leela against Komodo wanted to play knight d7, get that knight over f8 to e6, leaving the rook on a8, stopping this bishop a6 trick, of course. And actually, what Komodo did was Komodo wanted to exchange off this knight and then start attacking on the king's side. But it looks like Black is just in time to hold everything, because this king comes to d6, defending the bishop on c6 and stopping this bishop a6 trick. And then after h5, Black manages to play rook g8. So protect the pawn on g6 and yeah, avoid losing the pawn on h7. And yeah, it's one of these positions that the engines always judge really well. It looks like you're really conceding an awful lot to White. White's got the H file, he can come in, but actually Black's able to, yeah, basically just hold on without too much difficulty here, just by keeping some sort of static structure. And rook comes to c6, king can come back to e7 to defend f7, and well, quite a long game, but Leela held this with consummate ease really against Komodo. So that was it's just interesting, and just notice this point about that it's all tactics really, managing to defend the queen side and then to allow the rook to defend the king side, because you're going to see some very similar positions a little bit later, and well, the evaluation is completely different, but that's just because Black's a couple of moves slower. So after rook c8, king d2, bishop d7, rook h1 was played, and actually this was quite a big error. It was pointed out by Carsten Müller that bishop f5 is possible here. If the bishop goes back, then you're invading on c2, and yeah, this exchange, again, it's like those double pawns that we saw before. They're very ugly, but they're not easy at all to attack, and actually the fact that the c file is empty is not covered and entry points aren't covered, it makes it very hard for White to make progress. But my engines, of course, they wanted to do something different. Not rook h1, but rook c3. The idea being, one of those typical things that really good endgame technique. Don't let Black exchange off on c1, because then the king will have to go back. Make sure that if an exchange takes place, it improves the position of your pieces. And that means a king coming into c3, and then potentially coming into b4, c5, and wherever. So, yeah, the engines did not like this bishop being moved from c6, and well, we'll see why later. I didn't really understand why, because, I understood that this bishop was doing quite a good job, but it also felt like a big pawn, and you maybe thought, well, couldn't I move it somewhere else? But it definitely has a value there. And so, what my engines were trying again was to move the knight to f8, but they didn't want to allow the exchange. So there's a little bit of shadow boxing that goes on here. Bishop f4, and now bishop d6, and finally, Leela decided I want to go for knight f8, but actually this was just a problem, a5, because white is actually ready to play h5 and target this pawn. So black couldn't bring the king over to d6. If you go king e7, we'll go h5, and you've got a big problem dealing with this. If you go gh, obviously you can't move the rook away because there's bishop a6, but we're also looking for a rook g1 into g7, and there's this pawn as a target. So very unpleasant for black. So king f7, you stay with that, but this is a much more passive position now. And well, what does white do? Black forces white to take on g6. That's great, but now we're coming in with b5, king b4, and you try and defend it, and then pawns on the other side disappear. And well, this was a very long grind from Dragon against Leela, but Dragon got there, again without any particular difficulty in the end. The b5 pawn's very weak. We're going to bring the rook round, come round here, and start attacking the kingside pawns and trying to make something of this kingside majority. I'm not saying that I would do this flawlessly 100 times out of 100, but my engines do, and just for the objective value of the position, yeah, pretty clear that that white really stands very well here. So that was very very interesting, and just to see similar looking positions, but just the difference a couple of tempi can make. And it's all about understanding the essence of the position, which is really that this knight needs to come here. If white exchanges off the knight, the king needs to come to the king side, to the queen side, and allow this rook to police the king side. So yeah, so there was one more very interesting point there. Rook h1, rook c6, h5, g5 played. So we're that would actually happened in the game. And the big thing about this is that now we've got a big weakness for the h pawn. We're going to have weaknesses on both sides of the board. And bishop g3 was played by Steinitz. This was one typical way that the games ended with my engines. King e1, rook e1 check, and then rook f1. What is white doing here? f4, and just really trying to break open this king side. So after fg, if you go hg, I've got a runner, and if you go fg, then my bishop comes to e5, and then to g7, and then to h6. It's just you've created a weakness on the side, and then any exchanges, any loosening up of the position, that just works in your favor. And after g4, you go f5, and then of course you can see what's happening. The bishop's coming to f4, attacking h6, and actually also this pawn on g4 is completely open to attack with rook f4 to g4. So everything collapsing basically once that happens. The one interesting thing about it was, that after h5, the best move is not to go g5, it's to go king g7. Try and keep your position intact for as long as possible. Okay, there's pressure on this wing, so that's tying you down, but at least you're not, giving a clear target there. But what white did in my engine games was really quite beautiful here. So bishop b8, little bit of shuffling here, and now rook b1, king f7, b4. And you'll just notice that what then was the big strength of the bishop on c6. It was stopping this plan of playing b4 a4. You move the bishop to e6, where it sort of feels a little bit better, maybe a little bit more active, maybe looking at a few more squares, but it's not restricting the advance of b4 to b5 anymore. It's not attacking the pawn on a4. And yeah, this idea with b5 is just very, very unpleasant here. It drives the rook back. By attacking the queen side, it opens extra files, so we get the a file. Black can't make any particular use of it, but white can certainly cause some problems here. This is one winning way, and you're going to see what the point is. We're attacking the bishop on e6. Bishop comes to c7. We go b6, And then we go bishop g6. That barrier on the e file was not that good. Rook e6, and well, it's a long conversion still, but we've got stuff like king c5 coming in at certain moments, or also just the rook coming into h7. Yeah, again, these are not trivial technical tasks for human players, but for engines, again, leading 100% to wins. So there we are. Those are some of the moments that I wanted to go through. I thought the initial position here was very interesting, and I think that's a real display of why for increase in technique of modern grandmasters compared to strong players. I think we know exactly what to do in these types of positions now. But yeah, I have to say that Leela took it a step further with this incredible double pawns plan, which I really like, and that's definitely going into my positional database. I also thought that these sort of the way that the engines was trying to repair what Lipschuetz had done with the black play was very good, and wanted to go back knight d7 straight away, not leave that knight on b6, and I think it just shows how a seemingly sort of logical normal plan can just cause problems, because black misplaces the knight a little bit, plays a couple of decent moves, but my engines are already getting quite confident of starting to win games from this position. But I thought that's Koivisto beating Stockfish 11 pretty convincingly, really. So when you think, I think Koivisto is in the qualification league, just incredible. Going to see whether it gets all the way to the Premier Division this time. Definitely got a chance. So I thought these endings were very interesting, where the difference with a couple of tempi make of being able to hold the king side, not expose a clear weakness, and then the evaluation a couple of moves later, where there just isn't time for that at all, because White's been given a bit of extra time. That's really interesting, and then I thought that last little thing about the bishop moving to e6, and then that actually allowing an extra break on the queen side with b4 to b5. Yeah, again, that gives you an idea of what are the defensive pieces doing in those positions, and yeah, sometimes a passive-looking bishop, a bishop that looks like a big pawn, can actually be performing a very useful task of actually restraining the opponent's pieces. And then finally, this the way that that once you've created weaknesses on both sides like this, that the way to exploit them further is often through exchanges, like this one, pawn exchanges. In a way, you sort of dilute the pawn structure, and a weakened pawn structure, is affected a lot more than a strong pawn structure. Gaps appear that can be exploited, and the idea of going fg, and after fg being able to bring the bishop into e5 to g7 to attack the pawn on h6, it's a very good illustration of that. So there we are. Hope you enjoyed that. If you enjoyed the video, why not give a like or subscribe if you haven't yet. Thanks, by the way, very much to all the people who've subscribed recently. We've had many new subscriptions, and that's absolutely fantastic. And also, take a look at my new book, The Silicon Road to Chess Improvement, which contains lots of stuff, lots of analysis and ideas like this. And otherwise, thanks very much for watching the video, and hopefully see you at the next one.